Fake cops came to tow my car. At first, I thought it was a joke, some neighborhood stunt, another complaint dressed as authority. Then came the sound, a single heavy click that carried down the cul-de-sac, final and precise, like a verdict being locked in. Two men stood under the street lamp, badges glinting silver blue, movements clipped, assured. Their SUV bore the words Compliance Division, in letters too polished, too confident. I stepped out, still in my work shirt, the air smelling of wet lawns and engine oil. One of them spoke about Community Ordinance 31, voice steady, practiced, as if he'd said it 100 times. Behind them, Mrs. Pike's window glowed faint amber. Her silhouette tilted the blinds just enough to watch. The taller one handed me a paper. No seal, no code, no signature. Just a single word stamped across the top in steel gray ink, compliance. The paper felt colder than it should have, as though the word itself drew the heat away. That was the night I learned how quiet power could sound. The street was still wet from the evening sprinklers when the two men walked toward my driveway. Their boots left marks on the concrete, dark shapes that faded under the sodium light. I watched from behind the curtain before stepping out. My neighborhood was the kind that believed in symmetry. Every mailbox polished, every hedge trimmed. Nothing ever happened here that couldn't be solved with a polite letter or a warning notice taped to a door. That was why the scene felt wrong. The uniforms looked right, but the rhythm was off. No badge numbers, no radio chatter, no backup lights, just a single clamp tightening on steel. A noise that landed like a verdict whispered under breath. I told them there had to be a mistake. My registration was clean, my parking record spotless. The taller one said my truck violated Ordinance 31, the same line as before, and handed me a paper. The language was dense, bureaucratic, but hollow. It quoted no statute, only the phrase under authority of the Civic Integrity Pilot Program. I had never heard of it. The shorter man circled the vehicle, his flashlight grazing the hood, the same deliberate slowness I'd seen from real officers measuring a crime scene. Only there was no crime here, just my old truck. Parked 2 feet from the curb as always. Mrs. Pike appeared at her porch railing, robe tied tight, phone glowing in her hand. She didn't wave, didn't speak. Her porch light flicked on, outlining the scene in dull amber. I asked the men for identification. The tall one smiled thinly and pointed at the patch on his sleeve, a silver shield, etched with a single word, compliance. No precinct name, no number. His partner kept his hand near the belt, not on the weapon, but close enough to remind me who was in charge. The air smelled faintly of ozone, the way it does after lightning or faulty wiring. I asked again if they were with the city police. The tall one said, "We're contracted enforcement under the HOA's federal partnership." He pronounced each word carefully, as if reading from a manual. My stomach turned. HOA had always been a nuisance letters about lawn height, threats of fines for leaving bins out too long. But the federal partnership was new. He told me they were authorized to remove any vehicle deemed non-compliant with aesthetic or logistical code. I wanted to laugh, but the sound that came out was a dry breath. My truck's engine still ticked with leftover heat. When I reached for the door handle, the shorter man stepped forward. "Step back. Sir," he said. "This is a compliance matter now." His tone carried a rehearsed calm that made it worse. That noise against the clamp tightening cut through the stillness, mechanical yet deliberate. It didn't echo. It lingered, vibrating against the air like the aftertaste of static. I looked at the paper again. At the bottom was a signature line left blank, and beneath it, a faint watermark of the same silver shield. The ink shimmered steel gray under the light. Something about it caught the reflection wrong, like it absorbed the glow instead of returning it. The truck rolled forward, chains dragging a rasp of metal on asphalt that stayed in my head long after the taillights disappeared. I stood there until the sound faded, the paper still in my hand. The silence afterward was the kind that hums, heavy with the realization that something ordinary has been rewritten without your consent. I walked inside. Laura was still out on a late shift with her team. The house felt larger without her. I placed the notice on the kitchen table, beside the mug she'd left that morning. The word compliance stared at me in all capitals, neat and centered. It didn't say who had issued it. Only that failure to cooperate may result in administrative enforcement. Administrative by whom? It never said. I called the non-emergency line. The dispatcher checked twice and told me no local units had been dispatched to my address. "Are you sure they were law enforcement?" she asked. I described the uniforms, the SUV, the paperwork. She hesitated before saying she'd forward a report to the county sheriff, but couldn't promise a response. "If it's HOA related," she said, "that's usually civil, not criminal." Then the line went quiet, leaving only the soft hum of the fridge behind me. I poured myself water, though my hands shook enough to spill it. The reflection on the countertop caught a flash of blue from somewhere outside. I turned off the lights, looked through the blinds, across the street. A camera blinked on the HOA sign, its lens glowing faintly. We'd never had surveillance there before. Another small upgrade in the name of order. I closed the blinds. Around midnight, headlights swept across the window again. A different SUV, same design, was slowing near my driveway before moving on. I wrote down the license plate, even though I knew it probably wouldn't matter. The letters blurred, the light distorted them. I kept the note anyway. Something about writing it made me feel less disposable. When Laura came home at 2 a.m., she found me at the table. She listened quietly while I explained. Her uniform still smelled of sweat and cordite, traces from training drills. "They said federal partnership," she repeated. I nodded. She frowned, picked up the paper, and studied it under the lamp. "This isn't any federal form I've seen." She turned it over. The watermark gleamed again. Faint, deliberate. "Silver Shield," she read aloud. "Never heard of it." I asked if she could check the database, see if the name matched any enforcement unit. She hesitated, then said she'd look discreetly. "Don't tell anyone at work yet," she added. "If this crosses jurisdictions, we don't want it flagged." I watched her trace the shield with her thumb. The gray ink smudged slightly, leaving a faint shimmer on her skin. She wiped it off, but the residue caught the light, a soft, silver film. Before we went to bed, I heard a different sound outside, less like a clamp, more like a pulse. Laura froze halfway up the stairs, instincts sharp from years on the force. We waited. The noise came again, a low, mechanical whir that didn't belong to any car. I went to the window. A drone hovered near the cul-de-sac sign, its camera glowing blue, steady and unblinking. When it moved, the light swept across our lawn, catching the reflection of the paper still on the table. Laura whispered, "That's not city equipment." She recorded a short clip, then powered down her phone. Whatever this is, it's organized. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, a pilot program gone too far, but as the drone drifted upward, vanishing into the haze, the night hummed with its absence. The suburban quiet I'd always trusted now felt staged, a loop running without sound. The click had become something else, a distant, continuous tone that didn't stop when the noise did. That was the first breach. Morning arrived colorless, the kind of gray that flattens every shape until even the houses look compliant. I left for the HOA meeting early, driving a rental pickup the color of concrete. The notice on the community board said, "Special Session Enforcement Clarification." The words sounded harmless, the way poison might sound like medicine if you read it slowly enough. Inside the hall, the air smelled of disinfectant and cheap coffee, folding chairs arranged in perfect rows. The flag in the corner tilted a little too proudly. Eleanor Pike stood near the podium, gold chain around her neck, voice already warming up in conversation with two board members. She saw me and smiled with the precision of someone adjusting a setting. "Not a feeling, Mr. Vaughn," she said. "I hope we can clear the misunderstanding tonight." I took a seat near the back. The fluorescent lights buzzed, their rhythm slightly uneven, like static trying to form a sentence. Neighbors filled the room, murmuring about lawn fees, fence heights, and the eternal debate over mailbox design. None of them looked at me directly. I could feel the space around my chair widen. Eleanor tapped the microphone, and the sound bounced across the room, a metallic pop, almost like the one from the clamp last night. "We're joined by representatives from Silver Shield Security," she said. 2 men in gray suits sat to her left, anonymous except for their posture. They didn't smile. "Our community has entered a pilot partnership with the Civic Integrity Program to ensure safety and aesthetic consistency," she continued. "All actions taken were within administrative rights." My hand tightened on the file I'd brought: vehicle registration, photographic evidence of my driveway, copies of local code sections. When she opened the floor for questions, I stood. The microphone cord coiled at my feet like something alive. "You called federal authority on a parked car," I said. "That's not community management. That's impersonation." Her expression didn't shift. "Mr. Vaughn, we're not calling federal authority. We're cooperating with it." She gestured toward the men in suits. "The Civic Integrity Pilot operates under federal advisement. Silver Shield is our compliance liaison." The phrase hung there, absurd and bureaucratic, yet dressed in legality. I asked to see the contract. She said it wasn't public yet, still in administrative review. I told her no local office had heard of it. One of the suited men finally spoke. His voice was calm, distant, like someone reading weather updates. "Some procedures exceed county jurisdiction during transitional oversight," he said. "Everything we do is pre-authorized." The room absorbed his tone like scripture. A neighbor whispered, "If it's federal, it must be fine." Another nodded. It was easier to believe in the paperwork than in me. I laid my documents on the table anyway. "There's no statute for aesthetic compliance enforcement," I said. "The HOA Act allows fines, not detainment or seizure." My voice echoed too loudly, bouncing against the sterile walls. Eleanor tilted her head, patient but firm. "You're escalating something that could have stayed civil," she said. "This meeting is about cooperation, not confrontation." The words cooperation and compliance sounded interchangeable in her mouth. The men in suits stood, gathered their folders, and left without another word. The door shut softly, but the echo felt heavy. Eleanor resumed the agenda as if nothing had happened. Line items about community improvements, funding for cameras at the gate, and a new rule limiting vehicle size within driveways. By the time the meeting adjourned, the sunlight had faded to a bruised orange. Outside, I caught up with her near her car, a silver sedan that gleamed unnaturally under the lamplight. "Why did you involve private security?" I asked. "You knew they weren't police." She placed her folder on the roof, met my eyes. "Order is just control with better branding," she said quietly. "And control is what keeps neighborhoods safe." She got into the car before I could answer. The engine started with a clean hum too smooth, almost clinical. I stood there until her taillights disappeared. Across the street, a small camera on the HOA sign rotated toward me, lens blinking blue. Last night I watched the whole street. Tonight, it watched me. I raised my phone and filmed the slow turn of its motor until it froze in place. At home, Laura examined the footage. "Not city hardware," she said again. "Probably Silver Shield proprietary tech. They've used similar rigs for crowd management trials." She zoomed in on the serial code, registered to a Delaware shell corporation. She looked up. "That's 2 steps removed from government contract territory." I asked what that meant. "It means someone built a legal maze," she said. "So every path looks legitimate until you try to leave it. We drafted a complaint, addressed it to the county office." Laura wrote the report in measured language, careful not to mention her position. We attached the footage, the false citation, and my statement. It took less than 20 minutes to prepare and exactly 10 seconds for the email to bounce back with an automated response: "Insufficient jurisdiction." The phrase stayed on the screen longer than it should have. It didn't explain or deny, just dismissed. Laura leaned back, exhausted. "They've federalized the gray zone," she murmured. "Everything between civil and criminal now belongs to whoever has the contract." Outside, the camera light blinked once, twice, then went dark. I thought it had turned off, but when I stepped onto the porch, I heard a faint mechanical hum, the same tone from the drone the night before. The sound didn't fade. It adjusted, like something recalibrating for a closer view. I stayed there, watching the empty street. The smell of cut grass mixed with exhaust from distant engines. Each house looked exactly as it should. Each curtain drawn at the same angle. Perfection masking surveillance. Laura stood beside me, arms folded, scanning the rooftops. "Someone wants you isolated," she said softly. "First the car. Now your credibility." The hum deepened, then stopped. The quiet that followed wasn't peace, it was anticipation. That was the night I realized compliance wasn't a policy. It was a language, and someone had decided I no longer spoke it. The morning after the meeting, the neighborhood felt quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was the hush that comes when people know something and decide not to speak of it. Mailboxes stood open, newspapers gone. A thin mist hung above the lawns like condensation on glass. When I walked to the curb, my name had already changed hands. Someone had printed flyers unmarked, unsigned warning residents about disruptive behavior. The text used the same language as the citation, "non-compliant citizen." I picked one up. The paper smelled faintly of toner and smoke, as if freshly baked in secrecy. By noon, the calls started. Not from friends, but from clients. Each conversation began the same way, hesitant, apologetic. "We've had to reassign the route," one said, "just until things settle." Another simply hung up after my name. Whatever had begun as a nuisance had become an infection. Laura found 2 more notices taped to the truck rental, both marked with that silver shield watermark. "They're moving faster than we can react," she said. "Whoever's behind this has access to internal records." She was calm, but her eyes carried the calculation of someone measuring danger by habit. I spent the afternoon checking the county record portal. My address now flagged with a note subject to compliance review. No agency listed. I tried to call the office, but the operator said the flag came from an interagency data share and could not be modified without higher authorization. The phrases sounded rehearsed, preloaded. When I asked which agencies were involved, she disconnected. The line clicked once, like the sound from the clamp, and then silence. That night, someone projected a looping video on the side of the community hall. It showed me arguing with the fake officers, edited to make me look violent. The angles were clean, the audio sharp. Laura froze the image frame by frame, tracing reflections. "They used the HOA cameras," she said. "No one else would have access." She tried to report it through official channels, but was rerouted between departments until the connection timed out. "They've buried the complaint under local disturbance," she said. "That means it won't reach internal affairs." The next morning, I found new graffiti on my garage door. Not paint stickers, perfectly aligned, each bearing a barcode and the word compliance. When peeled, they left no residue. The act felt less like vandalism and more like tagging inventory. I called Alvarez, an old acquaintance who worked in data analysis for a logistics firm. We hadn't spoken in years, but his voice carried the same dry humor. "You sound like someone who's seen a ghost with paperwork," he said. I told him everything. He paused before replying. "Send me the images of those seals. I'll run them through metadata checks." Laura warned me not to trust anyone outside official channels. "You're escalating again," she said. "They want a reaction. They want you to look unstable." She was right, but silence had already failed me. That evening, Alvarez called back. "The tags traced to a contractor using federal infrastructure," he said. "Delaware registration. No local accountability." He hesitated. "You didn't hear this from me, but the pattern matches something called Silver Shield Compliance Services." I told him that name was printed on the fake officer's sleeves. He exhaled slowly. "Then this isn't about your car. It's about data." The following days blurred into routines of watching and recording. Every noise outside became potential evidence. The HOA newsletter arrived printed on glossy paper, announcing new smart monitoring upgrades funded by a Civic Integrity grant. It included a map of security nodes marked by small icons shaped like shields. One was placed exactly over my address. I cut out the page and pinned it to the corkboard above my desk. Laura looked at it once and said nothing. At night, blue lights flickered faintly through the blinds, not steady like police strobes, but rhythmic, pulsing in short bursts. Sometimes the rhythm matched the sound of my heartbeat. Once, I stepped outside and found a small black device fixed to the power pole, a camera the size of a coin, pointing toward our window. I removed it carefully, sealed it in a plastic bag. The lens still blinked once, as if reluctant to die. The next morning, Alvarez sent a secure file. It contained fragments of internal memos from Silver Shield's network. Each one referenced community normalization metrics. The language was clean, technical, and empty. But one line stood out. High-risk participants may be socially isolated to ensure recompliance. That phrase settled in my head like dust. I realized the campaign wasn't meant to destroy me. It was meant to erase context, to turn my name into noise. Laura started receiving calls at work. Questions about her husband's behavior, her judgment, her stability. Someone's poisoning the well. She said quietly one night, "They're trying to separate us from the inside." She left her badge on the kitchen counter and stared at it for a long time. The silence between us carried the weight of unspoken calculation, how much truth we could afford before it became danger. I began documenting everything in a ledger: dates, sounds, license plates, light patterns, a ritual to stay anchored. The word compliance appeared 13 times in 1 week. I started hearing it even when no one spoke. It became a frequency rather than a word. The neighborhood looked the same, yet the air felt supervised. Children still rode their bikes. Sprinklers still turned on at 6 p.m., but every gesture seemed pre-approved. One night, a knock came at the door. No one is visible on the camera. Laura reached for her sidearm by instinct, then stopped. A package lay on the porch plane, unmarked. Inside was a flash drive and a single sheet of paper. The paper carried the Silver Shield logo embossed faintly in silver gray. Below it, a single sentence typed in small font. "You are being monitored for your own safety." Laura stared at it for a long time, then looked at me. "This is psychological warfare," she said. "They want fear to feel administrative." She picked up the flash drive, hesitated, then placed it inside an evidence bag. "We'll open it on a clean system tomorrow." That night, I couldn't sleep. The walls seemed to breathe with the hum of hidden machines. The blue light outside blinked at intervals too deliberate to be random. I sat by the window, notebook in hand, tracing the rhythm until it formed a pattern: 5 pulses, then pause, then 1. It repeated until dawn. A code without meaning, or maybe one I wasn't meant to understand. By sunrise, the mist had returned, thicker now. The street was empty except for the soft whir of a distant generator. Each house reflected the same stillness, each window the same blank face. I realized then that the neighborhood had stopped being a place. It had become a network, and I was no longer a neighbor. I was data. By the 3rd morning, the silence had become its own weather: thick, heavy, predictable. I woke to find the porch wet with dew and another envelope lying on the mat. Inside was a printed transcript of my own phone call with the county office. Every word, every hesitation, no header, no signature. Only a faint watermark: Silver Shield Civic Integrity Liaison. Laura stared at it and said nothing. She didn't need to. The line between surveillance and message had vanished. I drove into town to meet Alvarez at a coffee shop near the freight yard. The place smelled of burnt espresso and engine grease, a mix that made it easier to talk about impossible things. He sat in the corner booth, laptop open, a paper cup untouched beside him. "You've kicked a wire nest," he said as I slid into the seat. His eyes were bloodshot, not from fear, but from screens. Silver Shield's network runs deeper than I thought. They're not contractors. They're sub-grantees under a federal oversight pilot. He turned the laptop around. On the screen, a flowchart mapped connections between shell corporations, each arrow leading upward until it merged into a single label: Civic Integrity Pilot Program, Department of Homeland Compliance. I watched the cursor blink near the top of the page. "That's not a department," I said. He nodded. "Not officially. But the metadata tags come from federal servers. Someone's testing a civilian behavior metric tracking public response to minor authority enforcement." He zoomed in on one node marked Community Response Stream. "Maple Crescent Sector." "That's you," he said quietly. The noise of the espresso machine filled the silence between us. "They turned my street into a data field," I said. Alvarez leaned forward. "You're a variable in a control study. The HOA's the delivery mechanism." He looked around, lowered his voice. "Laura knows," I nodded. "She's keeping her distance at work. They've already flagged her clearance." He closed the laptop. "Then you need evidence that can't be buried." He pulled out a flash drive, small and black. "Network trace logs, temporary access. If they find this on me, I'm finished." His fingers tapped the table once. "Run it on an isolated machine. It'll show the signal paths from the HOA servers to federal nodes." I took the drive. It felt warm, almost alive. When I got home, Laura was at the kitchen counter reading a printed memo. "They've launched an internal review," she said. "Someone filed a report about me accessing restricted databases." She folded the paper slowly, her voice calm but distant. "It doesn't say who." I set the flash drive down. "We can prove this is bigger than the HOA." She looked at it for a long moment. "You realize what happens if we're wrong?" We decided to run the data on an old laptop, disconnected from everything. Alvarez joined by phone, guiding me through encrypted folders. Inside were logs, timestamps, packet trails linking Maple Crescent to a data center in Virginia. Each record labeled CIP Behavioral Index Update. The pattern repeated every 6 hours. Precise, machine-like. "They're measuring reactions," Alvarez said. "Fear, resistance, compliance rates all mapped to household IDs." Laura leaned over my shoulder. "That's how they knew when to escalate," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The smear campaign, the calls, even the package." She reached for her badge, then hesitated. "This isn't just illegal. It's systemic." Before we could copy the files, the laptop screen flickered. Lines of code scrolled by, erasing directories one by one. Alvarez swore through the phone. They detected the breach. "Disconnect now." I yanked the power cord. The screen went black, leaving only our reflections. "Too late," Laura said. She pointed to the window, across the street. The HOA camera light had turned red. A low hum followed the sound of the network tightening around us. Alvarez's voice came faint through static. "Meet me tomorrow. Dawn. Old Depot. Bring a copy if you can salvage one." Then the call cut. That night, neither of us slept. Laura packed a small case with documents, her service pistol locked away. "If this reaches command, they'll classify it before it hits daylight," she said. "We need chain of custody proof." I copied what fragments I could recover from the laptop onto a clean drive, mostly timestamps and checksum logs, but enough to show intent. Just after 3 a.m., a vehicle slowed outside. Headlights swept across the blinds. The hum of the drone joined it. Steady, familiar. Laura drew the curtain slightly. "Silver Shield Patrol," she said. "Private enforcement, pretending to be oversight." The beam lingered on our door, then moved on. The silence it left was thicker than before. At dawn, fog lay heavy over the industrial lot. Alvarez waited beside his car, hands buried in pockets. "They scrubbed everything from their public servers," he said. "But I found mirrored caches. Silver Shield reports directly to Director Henning, FBI liaison to the Homeland Compliance Board." He handed me a folder. Inside were printed emails, official headers intact. One line stood out: Field Operation Maple Crescent Authorized. Objective Monitor Civilian Defiance Protocols. Laura read it twice, then closed the folder. "Henning oversees my division," she said quietly. Alvarez met her eyes. "Then you understand how deep this goes." We drove back in silence. The neighborhood looked unchanged. Children waiting for the school bus, sprinklers hissing, lawns perfect. But I noticed new stickers on several mailboxes, small silver shields catching the light. Someone had expanded the study. Laura parked the car, turned to me. "We're past legality," she said. "This is infrastructure. They'll adapt before we can expose it." I looked at the folder on my lap, the ink already smudging under my thumb. "Then we build our own record," I said. "Document everything. Force daylight." That evening, as the sun sank behind the identical rooftops, the first of the new cameras blinked awake. Blue light swept across the houses in measured arcs, precise and indifferent. The hum deepened, a pulse running beneath the surface of suburbia. Laura whispered, "They're recalibrating." I nodded. The system had noticed its own observation, and for the first time, I realized it wasn't just watching, it was learning. Morning arrived, colorless. The neighborhood stretched out before me, its sameness now unnerving houses all polished in shades of gray, lawns trimmed to perfection, sidewalks swept clean. The air was still, save for the hum of the electric meter at the corner of the street. It felt as if the world had stopped breathing, paused to listen for something. I had to force myself to take a breath. We had an appointment with Alvarez, but by the time we met him, things had shifted. Laura and I walked into the coffee shop near the freight yard. Alvarez was already there, his laptop open in front of him. He didn't look up as we sat down, his fingers tapping rapidly across the keys. "It's worse than I thought," he muttered. "What is?" I asked. He didn't look up from his screen, his eyes scanning through data. "This isn't just a local operation anymore. The Silver Shield program's ties go beyond anything we've tracked. They're running a test on social compliance, how well people follow rules when they think they're being watched. And you're part of the experiment." I leaned in, not quite understanding. "How am I part of it?" He turned the laptop toward me. On the screen was a flowchart, detailed and unsettling. It traced connections between multiple shell corporations, all pointing upward toward a single label Civic Integrity Pilot Program. Department of Homeland Compliance. I stared at it for a long moment. "They're testing civilians," I said, the words sounding too cold to be true. "Exactly," Alvarez said, pulling up another window. "They've got a real-time feedback loop, your actions, your decisions. They're all being cataloged. When you file complaints, when you resist, it creates a data point for them to analyze." He paused. "And now, they're monitoring every move you make." Laura's eyes scanned the data. "So, the HOA's just the front. Silver Shield is the mechanism. But why Maple Crescent?" she asked. Alvarez sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Because it's a test case, a small, manageable sample. They can watch and manipulate it on a micro level. You're not the only one they're watching, but you're the one they've made the example." I felt the weight of that. Maple Crescent wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a model, a laboratory. Our lives were nothing more than variables in an experiment. "Do they know you're digging into this?" Laura asked. Alvarez looked uncomfortable. "Not directly, but they've been tracking everyone involved in the program. I'm sure my name's in there somewhere. I can't be sure, but if they find me, I'm as good as done." He paused. "But it's too late to stop now. The network's too big." I leaned back, trying to process. The weight of everything hung over me, heavier than the heat in the room. "What do we do now?" Alvarez tapped a few keys and pulled up another screen. "I've been digging into their metadata trace logs from the servers they're using. They've been recording every household's behavior patterns, and the data is being funneled through something called the Civic Integrity Algorithm. It tracks non-compliance, any resistance to authority, and it escalates from there. They're using this to measure how well they can enforce order." "Order," Laura echoed softly. "That's what they're calling this. You can't call this order if it's forced." Alvarez nodded. "It's not about justice or safety, it's about control, and now it's all automated. This algorithm feeds data into a higher tier, all the way up to Director Henning." I froze. "Henning's involved in this?" Alvarez gave me a pointed look. "Henning's at the top of the food chain, running this program under federal orders. If you want to expose this, if you want to tear it down, you need to get to him." I felt the weight of his words. We had to go after the person who had created the system. But how Alvarez tapped the screen again. I've been able to pull fragments of the internal emails from Henning's office. The most recent one mentions a map of compliant behavior that's set to be implemented across multiple communities, starting with yours. Laura looked at the screen. What's a map of compliant behavior? It's a digital representation of how people act when they think they're being watched, Alvarez explained. They chart compliance by analyzing actions, even small ones like following HOA rules. It's all data. It's about building the perfect citizen, one who doesn't even question the system. My head was spinning. So, we're part of a control system, a compliance map. Alvarez nodded grimly. Yes, and once they have enough data, they can replicate it nationwide. Laura clenched her jaw. Her eyes narrowed. And Henning's the one making it happen. Exactly, Alvarez said. But here's the thing, Henning doesn't know I have this. If we can get this data to someone who can expose it, someone with real power, then maybe we can bring it down. But it won't be easy. The higher-ups are watching, and they're getting smarter by the day. We left the coffee shop, the weight of Alvarez's words settling in. The city felt like a hollow shell now, the streets too quiet, the buildings too still. I couldn't help but feel that everything around me was under observation. The mundane rhythm of life had become a tool for control. Back at home, the house felt different. The hum in the walls seemed louder, like a constant pulse under the floorboards. I checked my phone. No messages, no updates, just the steady press of silence, interrupted only by the flicker of cameras outside. It was like the world was holding its breath. Laura and I sat in silence for a while, staring at the files Alvarez had given us. The weight of what we were carrying was starting to sink in. The documents, the proof of Henning's involvement, were important, but they were also dangerous. We were not just fighting a system, we were fighting its creators. We have one shot at this, I said quietly. Laura looked at me. We can't let them win. Her voice was firm, unwavering. I picked up the stack of papers, feeling their weight in my hands. We're going to expose this, no matter what it takes. Just then, the doorbell rang, followed by a knock. The sound was so precise, so deliberate. We both froze. No more games, Laura whispered. I walked toward the door. We had no more time to plan. The world outside had already noticed we were here, and it was no longer going to let us disappear. The knock came again, louder this time, the kind of knock that speaks with intent, not curiosity. It rattled the frame of the door like a warning. Laura and I exchanged a glance before she reached for her sidearm. I pressed my back against the wall, heart pounding, but silent. The voice on the other side was calm, almost rehearsed. Sergeant Vaughn, we need to verify some compliance reports. Please open the door. I could hear the subtle scrape of boots on concrete, the sound of patience worn thin. I stood still, my breath steady, my hand resting on the cold metal of the door handle. Laura's fingers hovered near the pistol, but she didn't draw it. Not yet. I leaned my head slightly against the door, trying to hear anything else, any clue. There was nothing but the sound of distant traffic, the hum of a streetlight flickering outside. No sound of urgency, no backup waiting. Sergeant, we know you're inside. You have 10 seconds. The voice carried a practiced authority, one I didn't recognize. It wasn't the same as the HOA officers from before. This was something more official, more invasive. I reached for the door handle. Stop, Laura whispered. Don't open it yet. She checked the window. Her finger pressed against the small surveillance camera mounted above our front door, and it flickered, briefly glitching. The surveillance grid had caught us again. They were one step ahead. What's going on? I whispered. She motioned for me to move to the back door. Her voice low but filled with the kind of command that comes from a career in law enforcement. We're not alone, she said. They've surrounded the house. We need to move now. They've compromised the grid. I hesitated, caught between action and the reality that once we left this house, we'd be stepping into a fight we might not walk away from. But there was no time to think. I grabbed the flash drive with the files Alvarez gave us, tucked it into my jacket pocket, and nodded. We moved swiftly, slipping into the darkened hallway that led to the back. Laura kicked open the door. and we slipped into the alleyway behind the house, out of sight. As we rounded the corner, I saw the black sedans parked at the far end of the street. Their headlights cut through the fog like beacons, waiting, watching. I could feel the hum of the neighborhood surveillance cameras on every street corner, in every house, all recording our movements. It was almost as if they knew we would try to run. Laura pulled me down the street, keeping low, staying to the shadows. "The best we can do now is to get to the drop point Alvarez set up," she said between shallow breaths. "Once we deliver the data, it'll be in the hands of people who can actually do something." I nodded. The alley was narrow, the walls close, and the sounds of our footsteps echoed against the concrete, muffled by the fog. But even then, it wasn't quiet. A distant whirring sound filled the air, the same drone-like hum from the night before. "They're on us," I muttered. Laura pulled me into a doorway just as the faint blue glow of a surveillance camera swept across the alley. She held her breath, staying perfectly still, while the camera passed, its light brushing over us like a predator's gaze. As soon as the light moved past us, we took off again, moving faster now, adrenaline pushing us through the fog. But the moment we stepped into the street, a car screeched to a stop in front of us, a familiar black sedan. The door opened, and a tall man in a dark suit stepped out. I recognized him immediately, the same man from the HOA meeting, the one who'd introduced himself as Silver Shield's liaison. He wasn't smiling this time. "Sergeant Vaughn," he said, his voice flat, controlled. I thought we could talk before things got out of hand. Laura's hand hovered over her gun, but she didn't draw it. "Not yet. Get out of the way," she said calmly. "We have the data. We're taking it to the right people. This ends tonight." The man smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was a smile designed to disarm, to make you think you were still in control. "You're making a mistake," he said. "We've been watching you for a long time. You're just one piece in a much larger system. You can't stop it now." I felt the weight of his words sink in. He was right. We had become part of a machine that was too big to dismantle. We were trying to fight back with paper trails and data tools that were already compromised. "Then, let me ask you something," I said, my voice hard. "Why are you still following me if it's already over? Why haven't you erased everything already?" The man's eyes flickered for a split second, a brief moment of hesitation, before he recovered. "Because," he said slowly, "you're the last piece. Henning doesn't want this getting out. Not yet." He took a step forward, his tone softening, but his eyes narrowed. "You're an asset, Sergeant. We were prepared to let you walk away with this. But now, you've become a liability." I didn't wait for him to move again. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the flash drive. Tossing it to Laura, she caught it in one smooth motion, her eyes narrowing in determination, without a word. She turned and ran, the fog swallowing her in seconds. I didn't hesitate. I ran in the opposite direction. The streets were empty, but I could hear the sirens, the distant engines, the hum of the surveillance grid still watching. But we had something they couldn't track: the flash drive. Alvarez had warned us that if Henning was involved, there was no turning back. But I didn't realize just how deep the rabbit hole went. Not until I was staring down the barrel of a system that was so advanced, so well-oiled, that it could erase the very concept of choice. I reached the corner and turned, my breath coming in short bursts. The car behind me revved its engine, but by the time it reached the intersection, I had already disappeared into the fog. The morning after we sent the files to Sarah, the air felt thick with anticipation. I didn't sleep much. Neither did Laura. We both knew what we had done could change everything, but we didn't know exactly what would happen next. There was a quiet hum in the house, the sound of the world moving on its own, unaware of what was coming. Sarah had promised us that once the information went public, there would be no turning back. We couldn't undo it. The press release had been prepared, but we hadn't seen it yet. We'd just given Sarah the pieces, and now she had to work her magic. The weight of the truth was heavier than I'd anticipated, and I found myself pacing. Laura sat at the table. Flipping through the files, we had copies of everything we had gathered. "We have one shot at this," she said. her voice steady, but I could hear the tension beneath. We're not just exposing a corrupt system. We're taking it down. If this goes wrong, she trailed off. Neither of us needed to finish the sentence. I checked my phone every few minutes, but there was nothing, no news, no updates. Time dragged on, each second stretching longer than the last. The moment we'd been preparing for was finally here, and yet it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a countdown. We knew the system would react. It always did. Around noon, the first text came in from Sarah. "It's going live in 10 minutes. Stay out of sight. If anyone contacts you, don't engage. This is the moment." I stared at the message, then passed the phone to Laura. Her eyes scanned the text. Then she sighed. "It's happening," she said, and there was no excitement in her voice. Just the same grim acceptance that had taken hold of us both. The hours that followed felt like a blur. We watched the news from various small outlets trickle in, but it wasn't until late afternoon that it hit the major platforms. The headline read, "Government Surveillance Program Exposed Suburbia Under the Watch of Silver Shield. A federal pilot program in secret." I couldn't breathe for a moment when I saw it. The words stared back at me from the screen, a confirmation of everything we'd feared. The article detailed everything we had uncovered: Silver Shield, the Civic Integrity Program, Henning's involvement, and the use of HOA as a tool for surveillance. It was all there, in black and white, for the world to see. Laura was still watching me. I could feel her gaze, but I couldn't pull my eyes away from the screen. It was the moment we'd planned for, but it felt more like we were witnessing the beginning of the end. "Do you think it's enough?" I asked, my voice hoarse. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she sat back in her chair, her eyes focused on the screen. "I don't know, but it's out now." She paused, her hand gripping the armrest. "The truth is public. It's in the open." But even as the article spread, I knew the system wasn't going to let this slide. It was too big, too important. It wouldn't just collapse from a press release. Henning wouldn't let that happen. Just as I was about to speak, my phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. "It's going viral. The bigger outlets are picking it up, but they're trying to lock it down. Prepare for fallout." That was the moment it truly hit. The floodgates were open, but the system was already trying to dam them. Every minute. The media network grew, but so did the resistance. The government was already mobilizing. I could feel the shift in the air. The first signs of the crackdown had begun. Within hours, the first arrests began. Not the masterminds, not Henning, but people on the ground, journalists, activists, anyone with a connection to the story. They were being rounded up, detained without explanation. They were the new targets, the canaries in the coal mine. They were being silenced before they could speak. I saw it happen in real time on the news. People were disappearing. The system was reacting faster than I expected. They weren't just erasing the narrative. They were erasing the people. Sarah's next text came through. "The government's using every legal loophole they have. They're painting this as a conspiracy. Stay off the radar. It's going to get worse before it gets better." "We need to go to the authorities," Laura said. "We have to go further. There's too much at risk now." I shook my head. No. Going to the authorities is what they want. They'll lock it down completely. This isn't a fight we can win by playing their game. Laura's expression hardened. She was right to push, but she knew I was right too. If we went to the system, we were admitting we were part of it. We had to stay outside. We had to push for exposure, but we couldn't rely on the very system we were trying to expose. I paced the room again, the sense of urgency tightening around me. The system would retaliate. It always did. They would push back harder, and the harder they pushed, the more dangerous it became. The people we had trusted, Sarah, Alvarez, were already at risk. They had no idea how deep this went, how far-reaching the consequences of this exposure would be. "Sarah's got us in. She's already getting the story to the right people," Laura said, her eyes scanning the room as if looking for an answer in the walls. "But Henning's not going to sit back. He'll do whatever it takes to keep this from getting out, and we've just made ourselves a target." I knew she was right, but there was no turning back. At 6 p.m., the news broke again. But this time it wasn't just about the surveillance program. The narrative had shifted. The government was framing the exposure as a conspiracy theory gone wrong. The public was being manipulated, fed lies about the truth we had revealed. They were trying to bury it under a layer of doubt. It was clear now. This wasn't just about stopping the truth. It was about controlling the narrative, rewriting it before the truth could take root. Laura stood up, her face set. We can't let them bury this. We can't let them control the story. We have to push harder. And so we did. We kept pushing. We used every contact we had, every piece of evidence, and we exposed more. Each layer peeled back revealed something darker than the last, and each new reveal fed the fire of resistance. But even as we pushed, we knew the system wasn't done fighting back. The fight was just beginning. The morning after the first major news broke, the streets felt quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was as if everyone knew something had shifted, but they didn't quite understand what or how it would affect them. The hum of surveillance that had been a constant undercurrent in our lives was now louder, more insistent. I could feel it everywhere. It wasn't just in the cameras on every corner or the drones overhead. It was in the way people moved, the way they looked over their shoulders, like they were waiting for something to happen. Laura and I spent the day in motion, constantly looking over our shoulders. We weren't safe anymore, not just from the authorities, but from the system itself. It had been put in place slowly, methodically, over the years. And now it was so embedded in every part of our society that we didn't even know where it ended. Where would it stop? The media had gone wild. Some outlets were still covering the Silver Shield story, but others had shifted focus. They were spinning it now, calling it a whistleblower hack, framing it as a conspiracy. It was getting harder and harder to tell what was real. The government's pushback was swift, but not enough to quash everything. Not yet. But I knew what they were doing, drowning out the truth with noise, denying, deflecting, then going after the messengers. I checked my phone again. Nothing. No new messages from Sarah. No word from Alvarez. They're out there, Laura said, her voice low. She was pacing again, the way she always did when she was on edge. Alvarez. Sarah, they're in danger. They know what's coming, I said. But it's not just them now. It's everyone who's even tangentially involved in this. Once the truth gets out, they'll bury anyone who stands in their way. They've already started. We were both quiet for a while. The weight of it all hung over us like the sky was about to break. The camera's blinking light across the street caught my attention. Another one. I could see the faint reflection of it in the window, just enough to know it was tracking us. They know where we are, Laura said, her voice soft but sharp. They've been tracking us since we exposed Henning, and they're watching, waiting for us to make a mistake. I turned to face her, the unease settling in the pit of my stomach. The system will never stop, not unless we tear it down. And even then, I trailed off. We didn't have the power to take down a system that had become so ingrained. It was like trying to fight an infection with a bandage. We needed a new plan. By the time night fell, we had no choice but to act. The plan was simple: get to Sarah before they could close in on her, take the backup data she had, and get it out of reach. We didn't have time to go through the proper channels. The longer we waited, the closer we came to being swallowed up by the system we'd tried to expose. We drove to the rendezvous point Sarah had given us, an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The roads were eerily empty. The quiet felt suffocating, like we were the last two people alive in a world that had already moved on without us. When we arrived, Sarah wasn't there. The warehouse stood in front of us like a skeleton bear, cold and unwelcoming. There was no sign of movement inside, no sign of life. But I knew she was there. I felt it in my gut. Stay alert, Laura whispered. She didn't need to tell me that. I had been alert since the first time they'd knocked on our door. We stepped inside. The air stale and thick with dust. The warehouse was empty. Save for a few old crates and metal beams, I could hear the faint hum of a generator somewhere in the back. But otherwise, everything was dead silent. Then I saw it. A laptop sat on a metal table, the screen glowing faintly in the dark. The data was there, the last piece we needed, but there was no sign of Sarah. Sarah, I called softly. There was no response. Then, from the corner, a voice, low and controlled, spoke out. She's not here anymore. I froze. The man who stepped out from the shadows was tall, his face obscured by a dark hood, but I knew who he was. It was one of Henning's men, the same one who had spoken to us at the front door. I took a step back, reaching for my gun, but he was faster. He reached into his coat, pulling out a small device. "Put it down," he said. "There's no need for violence." The device in his hand beeped once. "You're already too late," he said. "The system will adapt." "Sergeant, it always does. It's not just about control anymore. It's about survival. And you're not going to survive this." Laura's eyes flashed with recognition. "You don't get it," she said, her voice steady. "This is bigger than you, bigger than Henning. It's a machine that can't be stopped, not by you or anyone else. It's already too late." The man smiled, but it wasn't a smile of victory. It was the smile of someone who had already lost. "Compliance never dies," he said. That's when it hit me. He wasn't trying to stop us. He was trying to recruit us into the system. But the system wasn't just a tool. It was the end of everything we knew. It was a machine, an endless loop. And if we didn't break it now, it would break us. I glanced at Laura. We both knew what we had to do, without another word. I lunged forward, knocking the device from his hand. The struggle was brief, a blur of movement and chaos. But in the end, the man was on the ground. We had no time to waste. I grabbed the laptop and the drive, and together, we left the warehouse, stepping back into the cold. Indifferent night. The system had its grip on us. But for now, we had won. If this story resonated with you, don't let it fade away. Share the HOA stories with those around you and let them awaken to the invisible systems controlling our lives. Silence shouldn't be the answer. Speak up.